constitutional decision-making. It probably makes sense. If you really don't want to fight the war, you're not going to be a very good soldier. So they probably don't want you anyway.
Good place to step in, hopefully. Okay, civil discourse. 15 minutes.
Maybe you guys can help me with this. It seems to me the government passed a law that said if a pharmaceutical company made a bad batch of serum or immunization stuff, they couldn't be sued. Is that true? Or and isn't that a scary thing? I think it was a 1986 decision, and I'm going to not be able to
It's probably
find it.
based on a congressional statute, right?
Right. It was the Congress passed a law that says if you got sick by a bad, I mean, not that there was a side effect, but they botched the recipe. You can't sue them, even though how many people might have gotten it. And so that's a scary thing to me. Again, I got my kids immunized, so I mean, I'm with you in a lot of ways. But just defending the people that don't want to subject their children to this, and experts are wrong. There's unintended consequences. I think $2 billion have been awarded in claims to people that got sick because they got immunized. Now, that's probably a drop in the bucket compared to what the cost of health care, the savings based on all the people that did get immunized. I mean, I realize $2 billion sounds like a lot of money, but in today's economy, it's,
Right,
I'll take it.
And Ed and I certainly aren't arguing that individuals should be able to opt out. They should be able to opt out, as long as they're educated and they're not ignorant on the issue and they're getting information from credible sources. So I'm not arguing that.
I take some issue with, I guess, the implication that this is all about promoting and supporting the vaccine industry, and the CDC is all about supporting the vaccine industry, and that's their whole mission. I actually worked for the CDC for 2 years. I collaborate with people from CDC. I was at a flu meeting with people from CDC last week, and I can tell you that they are not shills for the vaccine industry. They are serious public health people and they're serious scientists. We've published some stuff on showing that vaccines don't work nearly as well as we would all like, and they weren't too happy about it, but they didn't, they published it. Mm-hmm. And so at the same time, I think it's, I'm certainly not going to defend a decision by Congress to, remove liability for the vaccine industry in most circumstances. I know in the 2009 flu pandemic, when there's real concern this could be a really bad pandemic. It wasn't as bad as people feared, but in order to get those vaccines made, the industry basically said, look, we can't be liable. We're going to produce this vaccine and roll it out in no time at all with no time to test it. You can't hold us liable for this. And I think that was a reasonable thing.
And those weren't mandatory vaccinations, though, were they?
Those were not mandatory vaccinations.
But that's a little different than what we're doing to kids.
Right.
What about capping the liability? I mean, tort lawyers are also into their own self-interest as well.
You bet.
From a libertarian perspective, I'm sure you're very aware of that. And it costs over $1 billion to produce a new drug. It's incredibly expensive going through the FDA and doing all the research, et cetera. So there's huge capital fixed costs. And if you allow lawsuits, especially if it's in some states that are factories for this kind of thing, it's a very federalistic kind of thing, you're going to prevent companies from doing what they need to do in order to be successful in an area that has a lot of public interest attached to it. So I think it is kind of a dilemma. At one time, Congress, they probably still do, I haven't followed it, capped the amount of damages you could recover if a nuclear plant blew up. And it was like $35 million. This is back in the 70s, which is, of course, even then was nothing compared to what the damages could have been. But the idea was you're not going to build a nuclear plant if you don't get some sort of immunity from lawsuits beyond a certain point.
And I just want to come back to the vaccine safety thing too, because we do that. We do vaccine safety research as part of a national network. And there was an act passed by Congress back in the 1980s that essentially sort of established a victims' compensation fund for people who are legitimately harmed by vaccines. And I'm certainly not going to say that it never happens. It does happen. It's just that overall, the number of lives saved and hospitalizations prevented is far greater from the vaccine preventable diseases than from those small number of children who are harmed from it. But still, when that does happen, there needs to be appropriate compensation. That was put in place in the 80s. Also, the vaccine adverse event reporting system, which allows physicians as well as the public, anybody can report an adverse reaction that's kept in a database, and they look for signals from that. And then the last thing, which we're involved in Marshfield, is called the Vaccine Safety Data Link, and it's a network that covers more than 10 million kids and now also millions of adults around the country, and we're able to look for very rare adverse reactions to vaccines like Guillain-Barré, which is a type of paralysis that occurred back after the 1976 swine flu vaccine. Things like there's a problem with a bowel collapse in infants that occurred after a rotavirus vaccine back in the 1990s, and that vaccine was pulled off the market. Those are real legitimate safety issues. They were dealt with, and the system now is in place to pick those things up very quickly and respond to them. So I just want to put that out there, that this is not being taken lightly. It's considered a serious problem at the government level, and the government is partnering with academia in order to try and address this.
Another issue that always shows up for me is, we think death is so awful. We're all going to die, and no one that I know of has died and come back and told us anything. But so if your religious beliefs say that when you die you're going to heaven to be with your Lord, why is that punishable if you let your child die? Last time I looked, every child that ever was born died at some point in their life. Okay, and we're all going to die. And again, this is maybe just too philosophical, but our culture...
There's no such thing as too philosophical.
I was a philosophy minor here at Point, too, by the way. But, at some point, our culture is going to have to deal. 90% of our healthcare costs are our last year of life, I believe. And we're going to have a conversation about euthanasia at some day. And maybe we'll be up here in 2 years from now talking about that.
That's a different issue
it is.
Between a child who may have another 80, 90 years of good life left versus, people who are at the end of their lifespan. So if you imagine, in your philosophical view here, you could give your child a time machine at the moment the parent's making the decision and allow that child to fast forward to age 18 and say, do you want your parent to decide this?
Well, how about abortion then?
Right, well,
abortion opens up this whole can of worms, don't you think? And abortion opens up euthanasia, which is why so many people are fighting abortion, because if it's legal to kill you before you're born, it might be legal to kill you when you're 90. You see what I'm saying?
Well, the bigger issue is killing you when you're 6 months old.
I guess I'm going to ask the
Yeah.
panel to try to stand public vaccination.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring us back to that. So, one of the issues that I take with, your religious freedom to allow your child to die with vaccination, here's a perfect example. Danielle Ramriga, who, this goes back to the Minnesota case, although this is a person commenting on it. A mother who lost her 1-month-old infant, Gabrielle, to pertussis, expressed her sadness at the current Hib outbreak. It's very difficult for my husband and me to learn that another family is suffering because of a preventable disease, she said. Infants too young to be vaccinated, like Gabrielle, depend on the community for protection to keep the disease at bay. It is my greatest fear that parents who believe false information about vaccine safety won't immunize their babies and will experience the heartache of having to watch their babies suffer the way Gabrielle did. So even though you may be okay with your child dying, them being unvaccinated and potentially exposing an infant who cannot get vaccinated yet, do you think you should have that choice to allow another human being to die as well?
That's a good argument. As libertarians, we talk, I have the right to swing my fist, but it stops at your nose. Mm-hmm. And same with our germs. Our germs just don't stay in our bodies. They go up. Okay. So we sort of have to play the devil's advocate.
But the problem you
here
have is that you're making a decision for a 1-year-old or 2-year-old who has no ability to make any kind of informed decision about what they want to do with the story of their life.
I'm going to make a million decisions for that.
I think that's a better.
But this is life and death.
I think that's
And what if
where the control belongs, not with the state.
But what if
with
your
the
religion
parent.
tells you, it was a new weird religion, I mean, the Supreme Court has held that there's a snake worshiping religion in Florida that is entitled to full First Amendment free exercise protection, okay, 1993 case. So my religion is that I believe in, I watched that movie with Mel Gibson about the South Americans back in the Inca era.
Okay.
There was human sacrifice. So I sacrifice, 6-month-old children. Every time a kid gets 6 months, I sacrifice. I mean, certainly you wouldn't protect that.
Well, the government did back then.
But you would do
The
that
government-
now? You would let parents just kill their
the gov-
6-month-old child
the
because that's their
government
religious
sanctioned
belief?
Would I?
Would you? No, as a matter of public policy, we endorse that the criminal law shouldn't touch this person because their religion told them that infanticide was religiously mandated.
If that's the social norm, you have to go with it, don't you?
I rest my case.
I think,
So I see what you did to me. But that's right.
I want to sort of cut off the civil discourse at this point, and it has remained very civil and very entertaining. We want to thank you all for your comments.
But I would add, it hasn't been entirely civil. At dinner, we were all laughing and joking. There's been some tension, right? Which I think is great. That's why I think the Harvard thing was, ever see that Seinfeld show where they put smiley faces on the mailboxes and had to kiss each other? Every time they walked in, it ended up being a complete disaster. Well, that's like the Harvard program, I think.
I think what we want to say about that is it has been civil.
Yes.
And
In
it's
the
civil
right way.
in that you have been able to share your ideas without necessarily turning your brains off.
Well, and civil doesn't mean without passion, right?
Of course,
Absolutely.
Of course not. So what I wanted to do is, first of all, thank you for coming and sharing your ideas here. This reminds me a little bit, I'm old enough to go back to Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House, and Ronald Reagan was the President, opposite parties. And they battled it out in Congress, they battled it out on the Hill, and they went out for drinks afterwards, and they were fast friends. And I think this is what we can learn from this kind of conversation. Now the fun stuff starts. You folks have a little device in your hands. And I was tempted to ask the following question as our first question. What did you think of Brett Favre before and after he went to the Vikings? But we decided to do something a little cuter than that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask you to vote. And this is a test question first. The test question is, what is your favorite color, purple or gold? You have 10 seconds to answer that question. And you get number 1 for purple and number 2 for gold. And if you have a problem with this, there are people that can help. You only hit it once and you should see something on the screen.
Where did I go?
If you're having a problem, just raise your hand and we'll come over.
Yes. We want to make sure everyone can do this. Has everyone voted? Has everyone voted at this point? Close the voting.
And the answer is, better word, okay.
That's so wonderful. Interesting. Okay. This is a test. Now that you know how to use your device, and you haven't used the red button. School colors, that's what those are our school colors, by the way.
It's also white.
Thank you. Very important. The second question we'd like to ask is more of a demographic question, and that is, what is your age range? And please be honest, this is anonymous. Oh, I'm sorry.
I want more categories.
All right, so polling is closed. Okay, it looks like university to me. Next question. Did this conversation substantially change your views about the topic? I want you to think seriously about this before you answer. 1 is yes, 2 is no. Polling closed. And the answer is no. Next question. And this has to do with the civility definition that we gave, the Civil Discourse Initiative we gave you about humility and competence. Try to think about what those were again. To what extent do you think the forum participants demonstrated intellectual confidence? 1 is not at all. 2, to some extent. 3, to a great extent. Three, to a great extent. So we've had some impact on the audience. To what extent, the next question, to what extent do you think the forum participants demonstrated intellectual humility? Results, to some extent. And finally, final question. There are no final questions. I'm only kidding. Having said that, what we would like to do at this point is thank. Yes.
We do have one more.
We do have another question. I missed it then.
No, it's right there. It's on screen.
I'm sorry. Was this discourse more or less civil than other conversations you have witnessed on similar topics? Less civil being 1, 2, the same, or 3, more civil? And results, 89%. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. Please drop your clickers off before you leave. I doubt you'll have a use for them at home. Thank you for coming. Please spread the word about civil discourse. Our guest will be here for a few more minutes if you choose to come up and ask them. And please visit our blog site and you can...
For announcements on future events when they come, and